Hello, I'm Phil Little, host of the Private Investigator Experience podcast, where we talk about the life and cases of VI. Thank you for joining me today. If this is your first time joining us, I own West Coast Detectives International, a 102-year-old global security firm, and I look at my cases through the lens of my military, law enforcement, intelligence service, and global security background. Then I add a touch of my biblical worldview to come up with solutions. Now, this post today is part 2 of a diamond scam case, which we worked many similar type cases over the years, out of Africa. Now, on the first part, which you can check out on episode 36, it's the full workup of the beginning, but I'm going to give you a short summary of how we got to where we're at today. A client retained us to recover $3 million that he had paid for diamonds that had been supposedly sent to him from Ghana, but when the box of diamonds got to New York, it was full of rocks. We learned that the scam was operated by a woman who lived in both the U.S. and Ghana, and she was a Ghanaian citizen also. We were able to track her activities and residence in the U.S. as well as Ghana, and the case became much bigger than we ever imagined. And now it's time to hit the ground in Ghana to see what we can find out. Part of our tradecraft is to develop local assets on the ground in any country that we operate in, as well as cities in the U.S. Why do we do this? Well, they know the area, the streets, and their local terrain. They have vehicles and availability of armed agents, which if we as Americans go into foreign countries, we in most cases don't have. And they know the lay of the land and what would be counterproductive for us to do and what could be very dangerous to do. So they help us avoid that. In part 1, I showed the preparation prior to my going to Ghana. As we start this post, I'm on the plane to Ghana. The plane ride to unknown issues I will be facing always causes me to reflect on a case and can actually bring some anxiety. Even though from experience I know things will work out because I did my preparation, but still that little lingering there. What will customs be like? Will the people that's supposed to meet me? What am I going to experience? This was my first time in Ghana, so I had lots of unknowns, even though I had done a lot of research on the country. OSAC, which I mentioned in my first part, is a State Department private security liaison, which I've been a part of since 1990, has a lot of current security alerts on how to avoid problems in any country. And I had made my contact with them prior to leaving. Our agent on the ground would be meeting me at the airport, and I would be staying at the hotel that the embassy uses, so I knew that should be pretty secure. But I always had some thoughts as I'm in the air flying with time to think, after I've read and reread case files and studies. Will the local agent be at the airport? I haven't met him, but we've talked a lot and know a lot about him. But will he be there waiting for me? What if he isn't? What if he's a flake that I missed in some way? Well, what is plan B? And, well, as I got off the airplane in Ghana, he was at the customs gates with a sign waiting for me, and I smiled at my thoughts about, well, would he show or not? He showed. After introductions and getting my luggage, we headed to the hotel, which was about 30 minutes from the airport. I was scanning the area to remember landmarks as we drove on the busy street to the hotel. The area we were driving in looked safe. Lots of people on the streets, and at every stop light, people were selling things to drivers. Not unusual for me, for I've experienced that same thing in other countries. On arrival at the hotel, which had very modern and Western amenities, I checked in, and since it was late in the afternoon, and I'd been flying for 24 hours almost, we decided I would stay at the hotel, get rested, and then they would come and pick me up early in the morning for a 9 o'clock meeting at their headquarters. And sure enough, the next morning, the driver from the local agents picked me up, and it was a 15-minute drive to their office. Their office was very professional and the staff efficient. Always a concern when you go to a country that you haven't been before, what will they be like? The meeting in our agent's headquarters was very thorough. They had done a good job. a West Coast detective standard job with many case details. They also went into detail what the ground situation was like doing PI work in Ghana. And they have much less resources to work with than we do in the U.S. As in any country, the blessing of having local agents who knew how to operate would save time and money. And I wanted ones who operated to my standards, and it appeared to like that this group operated to my standards. They also gave me an overview of the police situation and the legal system, the prosecutors, and how it all worked. They reinforced, though, what the embassy told me about the police not having a lot of resources and that the legal system could be swayed by friendships and money. They also alerted me to the sensitivity of PI work in Ghana with more danger from the local population than trouble from the police. There had been cases of suspects following the PIs and threatening them, and in some cases they used violence. So the bad guys following the good guys. After 3 hours of briefing, we headed to lunch, and then they were going to take me out to see where the suspect Mary Diamond lived there, and some other addresses of interest that they had uncovered and that she was connected to. As we started to drive from the restaurant, which was near my hotel, the scene changed dramatically. It was November, and it was kind of humid, but we drove with the windows down, and my heart of compassion for people in need became very apparent to me. We are not any longer in an average neighborhood, but in where the surroundings that people lived, or should I say survived in, cried out for the basic needs of life. The streets narrowed, traffic thickened with every kind of mode of transportation you could think of. At every corner were the cries and voices of hands reaching out for hope, for some morsel of help. What touched my heart the most was all the children. He looked from hollow-lined eyes with hopelessness, and you could hear their agonizing cries for just a glimmer of hope from this car with affluent-looking people. And yes, the one who looked different from them, well, he must have come to aid us. The drive continued for what seemed an eternity, and there was proof positive that you don't want to try driving in unknown places. There were very few street signs. The street stopped, turned, started, went in all kinds of angles. And I happen to believe that a GPS would freeze in this environment. I think if I got dumped on the street, I would never get back to the hotel. We got to the subject's address, which was a modest house on a quiet street, away from the noise and the clamor of the streets and all the traffic. After viewing it for a few minutes and then briefing me on what they knew about her and her activities, I snapped some photos that I could have on my camera, and then they took me to some other locations. One was a large compound with high walls and big double iron gates. This one, they said, was connected to a person known for illegal activities and terrorist connections. When he leaves the compound, he leaves in a flurry of vehicles filled with dangerous-looking men with automatic weapons. I don't think I want to get in their way. They said the rumor is he has high government connections, which gives him freedom in what he does and where he goes. There are cameras all around the walls of this compound, and they said if surveillance is set up within view, they come out with guns and run you off. So that means surveillance on this compound is very difficult, to say the least. That's another reason you don't want to go roaming around a foreign country on your own. Back to the hotel, back through the busy traffic and streets and people and all the sights and sounds of a foreign city. And tomorrow a visit to the RSO at the embassy. On the next morning, after dinner the night before at the hotel and listening to some music and just trying to relax, and having several young ladies come and offer company for the night, which I politely refused with a smile, and giving them an answer that I was married and tried to live my life with my biblical worldview, which caused them to disappear pretty fast. My heart goes out to women who feel they have to sell their bodies to survive. Unfortunately, this happens in so many places in the world. For those who travel to foreign countries on business of any type, particularly you men, be aware of the pitfall of falling into the honey trap, which has taken down many successful men, particularly in foreign countries. The next day, on the way to the embassy to meet with the RSO, we moved into a very different part of town, and the influence that appears in some of the most poverty-stricken cities of the world showed here with the glare of all the high-wall compounds and perfectly groomed yards and trees and shrubs and security apparatuses. The RSO met me at the front gate of the embassy, and we went to a conference room where several other embassy employees joined us. They were happy to see somebody working on all the scams. They said they get so many people wanting them to act or do something, but they got limited. The only thing they can do is try to push the local officials to work to shut them down. I spent several hours at the embassy going through records, names, getting briefed by the staff for each section so I could get all the information possible on past complaints and how scams worked here. The RSO briefed me on the status of the police. He said there was some incredibly good police people, but they were hampered by lack of resources. He said he would set up a meeting with the local head of the police investigative unit for me to see what could be done. After a late lunch with the embassy, I left with a file full of information and names of those in Ghana and the states who might be helpful. The next day, I went to police headquarters with my lead agent, and we arrived at an old, large, 3-story building showing its age, but inside it was clean. Outside, there was vehicles all over the place, men standing around, looking like they were looking for something to do. And the yard kind of looked like a hodgepodge of maybe a halfway wrecking yard with a lot of vehicles that didn't look like they would run. The chief was very sharp and personal. We hit it off, and we discussed the problems with the scams. They were well aware of what was going on, and he apologized for being limited to what he could do. Not only with resources, but resistance to get prosecution on cases and the tools to build the case that would hold up in court. We talked about what needed to be done on our case, the interviews, the field work, trips to the bank to try to break through the resistance of the bank wanting to share information. So when we worked that out, even the detectives didn't have money for gas. They weren't provided gas in the police cars, and no money for food or other incidentals. So we came up with some expenses, which I gave to him to get the police detective division out working on following up these leads that our team had developed, as well as to look at the possibility of getting our suspect, Mary Diamond, and some of the others in for interviews to see what could be learned from them. You know, the bank that our client had paid money into was known for not stopping money laundering, and it was known high bank officials were being paid off, so we knew we had troubles within the banks. He also briefed me on how the justice system works and how they get cases prosecuted, saying that, unfortunately, a lot of judges are corrupt and bad guys walk free. Also, there's a problem of getting prosecutors to file cases. Sometimes it's due to short resources. To cut to the chase, all that I did in those weeks there at Ghana and after coming back to the States would take a book to fill in all the details of alleys we went down, dead ends we came to, staying with it, being persistent. And as my days went on, working with the police and the lead agent, who was also an attorney, we worked to get a prosecutor to start a workup on our subject and other affiliates of her who was already known to the police. In a few days, they brought Mary Diamond in for questioning. And as in the past, when they worked on her, she had, through connections, had avoided any charges. And usually while being interviewed, the word would come down to release her. As the evidence kept building up, it led to this big estate at the edge of town. But in the past, the police had been blocked from taking any action or even getting access to see what was going on. They couldn't get any warrants or whatever they had to get there. In working with my lead agents and the police, and with help of the embassy, we were able to put some pressure on where we got approval to raid the estate with the help of the Army. It was going to take a heavy vehicle to break through that gate, for they knew that no one was going to come and open the gate. Early one morning, all the forces gathered, assembled at the location with a tank-like Army vehicle. And they were right. There was no response from inside, so they rammed the gate and broke them open, and the investigators swarmed inside and into the house. Inside this house was rooms filled with computers worked by Nigerians who had come to the country due to the international pressure on them for all the scams run out of Nigeria. The bank situation was the result of a lack of oversight on the laws they had, the corrupt officials being brought off. The scammers, like in this working out of these houses, would set up accounts in the name of a scam operation, which would give them some credibility with the buyer. Now, there was all kinds of scams going on. There was these email scams that goes out to people that used to be in letters and it went to emails, and I've dealt with that. Those would be just trying to get $50, $100, $200, $300, $400, $500 from people, thinking that they were going to be recipients of a large amount of money. And then there were the scams like we were working that involved precious metals, diamonds particularly, and gold, which was being sold out of Ghana, and it was a legitimate product there in the official channels. But when these accounts would get set up in a scammer's name or whatever operation but they were naming their scam by, it would give legitimacy then to someone checking on them to see if they were a real company, particularly when an officer of the bank would vouch for them. Then, when the victim of the scam would come to Ghana to see the diamonds or gold, whatever it was, they would set up the shipping. They would work with the bank official. They would set up an account for the buyer from whatever country that they were in. Now, this is important, which I'll show in a few minutes. So here they go to the bank where the scammer has an account. Now they set up an account for this foreigner. It's all done in one day, pretty much, which is unheard of in foreign countries. So our victim now has a bank account in Ghana. And then we learned that now pretty much all the pieces were there. The scammers had government cover, bank cover, and now the final piece of these big scams, the ones in the millions of dollars, would be a customs broker who would seal the box of diamonds, take them into his secure custody, of course, and then the buyer would go back to the States and wait for the shipment to come through legal channels. Foreign buyers didn't know how dangerous it had been for them to come to Ghana to check out the system. Now, here were some of the ways that they operated. The victim would come to Ghana. They would pick them up, take them to a warehouse or building, and show them real diamonds. And they would be verified, and they could, if the buyer brought expert with them, they would test them, say, yeah, they're real. And then if the purchase was large, and I'll talk about smaller purchases in a minute, they would take him to the custom broker, and he would look like a legitimate business, and they would tell all his accolades, and he did this all the time, transferred precious metals out. They would check them out in everybody's view. They would be weighed. Price would be agreed on. The customs broker would seal the customs box, would put their address of the buyer in their home country. In this case, would have been New York. And they would put it in their possession and say, okay, it's secure and it'll be off tomorrow, or as soon as the buyer transferred money into their account in Ghana. And this process would take about 3 days or so. Then they would want the person to leave the country pretty fast. Now, the other type of buyer was one who brought cash in. Now, we found some victims that had brought as much as $30,000 in cash, got it into the country. They were going to make a smaller buy, and the buyer's risk was really high to them that they would leave the country. Now, the scammer would go through this same show and tell with the diamonds or gold at an office or warehouse, show the real product, make a deal on price, and weigh it. The product would be packaged, handed to the buyer, with the buyer transferring the money to them, and done. It was all cash. Yeah, done, right? Wrong. Just the beginning. The buyers would be put in a taxi to go back to the hotel or to their airport. They had to leave town that same day or the next morning. After leaving the warehouse, a few blocks away, they'd be in a taxi. They would be pulled over by a police vehicle, which would stop them. Red lights, siren. 2 or 3 men in police uniforms would approach the car and ask him what they were doing there in the country, who they were, check their passports or information. And they'd ask him, did they have any product that was illegal to purchase in Ghana? Of course, they would say, no, of course not. We have nothing. And then they informed them, well, we've had a tip that there was some bad product in this car and in this taxi. So you're going to have to come to the police station with us to get this all straightened out. And the taxi driver, who was part of the scam, would say, oh, don't worry. I've handled this before. It's just routine. We'll get through it. Once they got to the supposed police station, which looked like a police station, but it wasn't, one that the scammers had put together, and then the diamonds or gold would be found. And then they are told they've committed a major crime in Ghana, which carried long prison sentences. But they could help them out here. If they wanted to return the product and give up their money and leave the country, they would drop the charges, knowing that they really didn't mean to break the law in Ghana. But they had to leave Ghana the same day. And the people who told these stories left and were grateful they were alive, even though we're out their money. There were so many variations to the story, some with victims being held for a few days in very difficult surroundings. Now, our client, when he went down to Ghana to check all this out, he went through the same procedure, saw the product. He had a diamond expert with him who examined the diamonds, said, yes, they're real. They weighed them. The price was agreed on, which was substantially under the market value. And then went to the bank, met with the bank official, assured him that the seller was legitimate. They set up the bank account. And now he had a local bank account, which was very important in all this. Then they went to the customs office and looked like a legitimate custom broker, who apparently the person was. And they would then look at the merchandise again, check it, weigh it, prices agreed on. The customs broker would put the buyer's name and address and seal it. Now it's in the safe hands of this certified bonded custom broker. No problem. Your diamonds are secure, he would be told. So he goes back to his hotel. Next day, leaves the country. He's got his Ghanaian bank account. He's got his diamonds on the way to New York, and everything is great. So now, for the payment to the buyers, our client had wired funds to his account in the Ghanaian bank. So there was no money laundering. There was no international bank irregularities. Our client wired the money to himself. And then within that same bank, since the sellers had their account there, the money was transferred to the sellers. And the next day, the funds were taken out in cash. Well, you know how this works so easily. It's because, one, they had this all wired. They had real diamonds. They had a bank set up with everything covered, which made it seem legitimate. The buyer had funds that he had wired into his bank account that he was in control of, so he could do what he wanted to with it. And even thinking about this situation, what really makes a person go through with a large $1 million purchase? Well, one, you've been secured pretty much. They've done their homework on making it seem legitimate. And then there's that thing in all of us, this that says, boy, this is a big payday for me. I am going to make it big on this one. And we just fall through, and that hook gets us, and we're done. We transfer the money into their account, and then the real problems begin. I had mentioned earlier, and in my first podcast, that the impossibility of getting money back is next to impossible, and highlighted by what we found out at this bank and how fast it disappeared. You know, there was no chance. It had gone to too many people too fast. Now, with the pressure we were able to put on the police, we got into the bank. They got bank records, the bank accounts of our victim as well as the sellers, and that money had, once it transferred out of our buyer's account into the sellers, it was gone in 24 hours, turned into cash and out of the bank. Even though Ghana had a bank laws about cash and money laundering, and there was only so much cash that could be taken out in a day, that wasn't enforced, and they got away with it. And they had more cover to their trail by it being a local Ghanaian transfer. It wasn't from a U.S. bank that had transferred into the seller's accounts. They knew what they were doing. They had this same wire. These accounts they set up in the victim's name was brilliant, which took a lot of the heat off of them. And from this investigation for bank records, we learned that the money was paid to the leader of the scam, and he disbursed payments to the bank officials, government officials, and other members of this scam group. And this head guy was the one that lived at the big compound and considered dangerous, and he was, and connected to the Islamic terror group. And there was strong evidence that some of the money that he'd been raising on all these scams was going to support terrorist activities in different parts of Africa and out around the world. But in Ghana, with all his covering, money, and high-level protection, he was untouchable. The client's money was gone, dispersed to many different people. We were able to get prosecution started on some of the scam participants, which we worked on for over a year. Now, if I went into all these details, it would be forever and a book telling about them. But almost a year from the first trip I made to Ghana, I made 2 there, that I was there about 3 weeks. From that time where we actually got started with the police working on some prosecution, it went on for almost a year. We had some activities that went forward. We had some people that were charged. We had some court hearings. But when I was not able to keep funding the police and the client had said, well, we can't go any further, pretty much the activities stopped with the prosecutors, and all these scammers had attorneys that were corrupt and had relationship with the judges, and all the way they just wore this out in the court system there. But we weren't through yet. This took many months, but we still had Mary Diamond, and she was coming into the state still, and we were going to have a surprise waiting for her. As I mentioned in part 1, it was difficult to get the FBI to take a case of this type of scams or money laundering. The entry level they had was $5 million loss. They wouldn't take anything under that. And that was because there were so many of them, and they just didn't have the manpower to work it and the resources. But like I said, if you happen to know someone at the FBI, and I'd worked with many cases and had many friends at the FBI, and then I connected with another victim representative who happened to have a high-level political connection. And so he contacted the director of the FBI, and our contacts at the FBI were then told, go ahead and take and move on this case, which they did. We worked the case. We got warrants for Mary Diamond, and on her return trip at one point, a few months down the road, she was arrested and taken into custody. She was offered a deal, revealed the whole scam and scheme and people involved in the States as well as in Ghana, and they would give her a deal. She would walk with just a probation and a slap on the hand. She refused. No, not good. She wouldn't talk to anybody about anything. And we knew that she knew that if she talked and if she testified, her life would be very short. So she served out her 5 years in prison, and who knows what she's doing now. At least the client got some satisfaction, but I wish it could have been his money. The card didn't fall that way. My advice to anyone wanting to invest in a deal that sounds too good to be true, particularly a foreign country, is to spend a little money with West Coast Detectives or another reputable security firm. Check out the venture before investing. There was a lot of action that I couldn't go into in this post, but hopefully you will learn something about how we work and what is possible with some persistence, experience, and this diligence and tenacity of staying with. Also, you know what to do before you give your money to someone on a deal that sounds too good to be true. Build some background on seller. I appreciate all the comments and questions you send me, and you could help me out a lot if you share, like, subscribe, and you know the drill. Hit that notification bell so you'll know about future posts coming out. If you have questions more about this case or any other case, or if you think that a private investigator might be able to help you with a problem you have, send me that in my email directly at pi777@gmail.com, and we'll let you know what a PI might be able to do to help you and what the solutions could be. And they might be much easier than what you think. Again, you can leave your comments or questions at any of the podcasts or on that email I just gave. pi777@gmail.com. Until next time, be safe. May God bless you, your family, and may God bless America.